Welcome to the Artist Advisory Hotline, the podcast for artists who want valuable guidance and honest answers on how to grow their careers and develop their new project from leading art world experts and artists. Here's your host and founder of the Artist Advisory, Marina Granger. Tune in as she gets you the answers you deserve.
Hello, artists. I'm your host, Marina Granger, and today on the hotline, we have artist Tereza Barnard. It's my pleasure to invite her back to the podcast for a second time. In this episode, she speaks about some of the most common mindset blocks around being an artist and how to release them. If you listen to her previous episode on this podcast, you may remember that she has a graduate degree in psychology and she wanted to become a psychologist. But once she did, she realized that her heart was really in art and decided to pursue a career as an artist. Since then, she has become a full-time artist, exhibited her work in New York and LA and other cool places. Her work is in private collections all over the world, including like New Zealand. How cool is that? And in this interview, Tereza will share with you how she did this and her method of how you can too. So let's dive in. Hello, Tereza. Thank you for coming back on the podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So I wanted to dive right in because I've seen so much of what you're up to and what you're doing. But one really special thing about you is that not only are you a really cool artist, you also have a degree in psychology, like a master's in psychology. And one thing that we've discussed a little bit that I want to share with our listeners are some mind blocks that you feel are that you've seen artists have commonly, right? So what are the number one mind blocks that you have observed artists have?
Hi there. Well, thank you very much. And yes, so I have noticed that there is a number of mind blocks, and people kind of keep repeating the same stuff. And I started looking into it and started reading books and discovered some common denominators. So let's dive right into them. I think one of the biggest one that I personally struggled with myself was, have I got enough talent to dare to pursue art? Right? It's such a common one where you look at other people's art and you find it amazing and you're like, I can never possibly reach that because I don't have enough talent.
And I wanted to ask you that common mind block, where does it generally come from? Like, what are some, to the artists who are listening that probably resonate with this at some level, where does this really come from?
Exactly. Great question. So really what you are asking is you're asking for a permission, and it's an unconscious process where by questioning your talent, you're asking for permission if you can actually follow your true calling, follow what actually energizes you. And this asking for permission is usually something that comes from your past. It could be from your childhood, it could be from later on, some stuff that accumulated over the course of your life. But it has many ways how it can manifest itself. It could be things like, for example, you ask your husband, who might be a great guy, but he doesn't know anything about art. And you ask him like, oh, what do you think of this piece that I'm working on? And really what you are unconsciously doing is you asking him for blessing. You want him to tell you like, go ahead, this is just amazing. But because you phrase it in a way that makes it sound like you're asking for permission, what you get is like, well, maybe you should think about a different color. And then you get up into this like, okay, well, maybe it's not very good. Do I have enough talent? When this is not really what it's about.
And do you feel like we do this in other spaces where we ask for permission just kind of for that validation that it's okay to keep going? And if so, where do we do that?
I mean, that this can be applied to so many areas in your life, I'm sure. But I think like for us artists, this is where it comes across like the most. The other one is, I guess, when your art is not selling, that you automatically start blaming yourself that it's something wrong with your art, and not, for example, that maybe you need a little bit of help with marketing, and maybe that help is easily available if you find a good marketing person who can teach you that. You know, that you automatically just somehow turn it against yourself, and like it's something inherently wrong with you and that can't be improved. Yeah.
Yeah, and I can't help but think about when we're posting to Instagram as well, especially, you know, the artists that I've worked with, and I'm sure you have worked with. And you yourself, you have a great Instagram following, but there's always that moment where you're posting and thinking, hey, why am I not getting so much traction with this post, with this artwork that I'm sharing with everyone? Is it not good, right? Like, and so how can we combat these feelings, right? Or these beliefs?
It is like, I'm gonna be honest, it's not that easy because it peeks its head out, and you know, not everyone has the same level of these kind of self-sabotaging beliefs and self-sabotaging ideas in their head. Some people kind of self-sabotage more, and it comes from their own background. And for some, this doesn't seem to be that much of a problem. I find that there is many books that help you overcome that. For me personally, I found a book that really helped navigate the journey. It was called Who You Were Meant to Be by Lindsay Gibson. And I found that book, for me personally, absolutely life-changing, because it was mentioning the stages that you will kind of encounter when you know, when you face like some challenge, like for example these kind of beliefs. Basically what the book mentions, and of what I've seen several other authors mention, so I'm going to use kind of psychoanalytical terms for it, and it's like ego. Right? What's going to happen is that when you're really close to your kind of breakthrough and things are going well, you would think that that's going to be a time when like your inner voice is going to be like, great, it's finally happening for us, go ahead. But no, that's the time when you're actually going to be self-sabotaging the most, when you're about to, like, when things are not yet quite working, but there are actually signals that they could be. That's the time when your ego is going to be kicking in, going, well, it's not really working. That sign that you saw that it might be working, probably BS, right? Tone it back. Go back to your previous job. It was safe. You know? And I think that's the role of the ego, as what we think of it, is that it's there to keep us safe. So we feel like, okay, we better listen. But then what the book mentions, and I've also heard other authors mention that, was that ego is actually, like, you think of it as this, like, you know, let's picture it as like someone that keeps you safe. But in reality, it's like a bad tenant, one that doesn't pay you rent, and one that's telling you like, okay, well, I'm not paying you rent, but if you kick me out, who do you think you're going to rent this to? They're going to be even worse. They're not going to pay you rent, and they're going to break your furniture. So since then, this is what I think of it.
The visual I'm getting here is like brilliant. So yes, keep going.
So this is what I think about. You know, so for example, with the Instagram growth, when you like post something and nobody's responding, and you're like, oh my God, maybe it's my art, it's absolutely terrible, and you get into these ideas, and then you're like, you know, if you actually went out there at that point and started researching, you would find out that it's probably nothing to do with your art, but everything to do with how you present it, and everything to do with how you meet what the Instagram algorithms want from you. And, you know, you don't at the time realize, okay, well, it's actually the algorithms that are choosing whether my art gets shown to people or not. No. You think like, oh my God, it's something inherently bad about me. And this can be like, this can be like translated into so many areas, I think, with the Instagram, I think it's an obvious one because it's AI basically, or algorithms choosing what gets shown or not. Whereas with, in other places, like whether you get chosen for a competition or not, that's like that gets chosen by humans. So it's a bit different.
But yet we respond to it the same way. We keep thinking,
Yeah.
oh, something deems me not good enough. Right.
Yeah.
And so where to the artists who are listening that feel like they really resonate with this, what advice can you give them on how to get over it, right? Like how to get over this feeling that they are not good enough.
I think what really helps, and I kind of teach that to my students, is dig in deep into what could be the reasons behind why you feel that way. And I find that when you know the reasons, kind of like how to overcome them, because half of the time it's just like not knowing the reasons why something comes up. But if you suddenly know, like, okay, well, whenever I ask my husband whether my art is nice, what I need really is a blessing and not a permission. Why am I asking for permission? Well, maybe it's because, for example, I had a dad that really hated artists, and so I didn't dare to be one. It's not the case with my dad. He loved art, but you get the example.
Yeah, so like really go and see when was the first time you felt this way? Like when is the first time you remember feeling that you needed to ask her permission? Right?
With
Is
me
that
personally,
no,
I think
or like for people trying to combat this feeling, they have to go back in time and think about the first time they felt this way, and maybe that's the origin of the that feeling of that belief.
yeah, it could be, for example, when it comes to arts, let's say that you've always felt energized when you were around arts. You've always like loved the smell of paints, and you knew that like you would like to do nothing more than that, but you kind of didn't dare to do that. So think about like what your past is like, maybe even write it down. Think about like what your family situation was like. Were you from a family that was like full of scientists and they didn't really know what, what being an artist is like? Or was it like what was behind it? And then kind of sometimes it's in subtle things that maybe you thought that, for example, your mother was really loving and caring and she was like really supportive, but then suddenly when you write these things down, you remember that she had like a really disapproving look when you went for like an arts class and it was like not organized. Maybe she left organization and the art class that you went to was like, oh, just do whatever. And she, and you remember coming out of the art class and seeing the look on your mom's face going like, a bit of a shake on the head, going like, there was a disapproving look. And maybe you remember that. And it could be like little things like that piece together into you having that feeling. And then you kind of excuse it with like, do I have enough talent, or other things that you might tell yourself.
That
I think
is, yeah, that's really enlightening.
I think the bottom line is that we tell ourselves all sorts of stories, and like I keep talking about the do I have enough talent because it's like such a prominent one, and it's one that I personally had, as I mentioned, but it could be so many other like kind of silly rules that you don't see as silly rules. It could be like, right, so if I get into this competition and if I manage to like, get my artwork accepted, it's a sign that I can be an artist or shall be an artist. And if that's not the case and I haven't sold the work, then like it's a sign that like I should not be touching that, or something like that. And that's just another form of self-sabotage, basically. It's just another, it's just in different words, saying the same thing that I did previously. The psychology behind it is the same. The words are different.
It's almost like you're telling yourself a lie to keep yourself safe by
Yes.
believing these things, right?
Yes.
And you
Yes.
keep yourself safe, you keep your ego safe because your ego likes what's familiar. Your ego's
Yeah.
like, oh, it actually feels familiar and not to grow. So I'm going to self-sabotage every time something involves growth because I don't know what it's like to be on the other side of that, right?
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
Well, speaking of growth and talent, I wanted to ask you how, when I look at your work and I think about, your career as an artist and everything that you do, hearing that you at one point thought you didn't have enough talent to do this is like bizarre to me. So I wanted to ask you how you personally overcame this and became an artist.
Okay, so I guess I overcame this by really thinking about it. And let me explain. I really thought about what talent actually is and what might be the common misconception and misconceptions. So what I started noticing is that you see a lot of people, a lot of artists that are brilliantly skilled, and I purposely say skilled, and yet the comments underneath their Instagram say, oh, what a beautiful talent. Thank you for sharing your talent. And I've seen some of them actually respond back, so saying, 20 years of experience actually help. But a lot of them go like say thank you. And I myself, like, I don't want to get into online battles. So I go like, thanks. But deep down, I'm thinking, that's not talent. That's not talent. What do you think actually talent is? So I started questioning that, and I discovered that I think the prerequisite is what keeps you energized. And you know that, like, I know I'm not talented in music because I love music. I'm tone deaf. Maybe that can be trained like that. I don't know. Who knows? Like, not something I understand, right? I'll stick to what I know. But I'm not willing to put in the hours that I'm willing to put in the painting. With art, I just know that, like, somebody explained something and I'm like willing to put in the hours. I'm willing to, like, when I do it, when I get given a brush, I know I can spend more and more hours. Let me tell you, I'm not willing to spend the exact same time doing accountancy, right? And so naturally, I'm not getting any better at accountancy, but I am getting better at art. And I think this, like, feeling that you feel energized, I think that's what it's about. And I think for me, that's the talent, that you feel energized and then, things happen.
And
Yeah, sorry, I got
so,
a bit lost and, a bit off on a tangent there.
no, I
Yeah,
see
so
you're very passionate about putting in the time, right? So it kind of goes back to that saying that practice makes perfect,
yeah,
right?
yeah. So sorry, to backtrack what I was saying, I found myself there a bit. So one of the things was, thinking about what talent actually is. And then another thing was applying knowledge from other disciplines into art and thinking, like, why would this be different? So I started asking my dad, who's a dentist, by the way, and I was like, Dad, you've had 40 years of experience. I don't know how many now. 50 maybe now. And I'm like, you had this many years of experience. When you, like, do someone's teeth really beautifully, do they tell you that you've got talent? And he's like, Tereza, no, they don't. They tell me it's a beautifully skilled job. And I'm like, okay, interesting. So this is different, right? Why should it be different why should it be different in our field? And why do we feel in our field that we have to learn everything ourselves? There is that, like, common misconception that you're like someone somehow born a genius, and this is perpetrated by stories about Picasso and how he was basically painting, like, absolutely beautifully at the age of 8. And you think, like, well, that can never be me then. Like, I'm definitely not like this, right? What if it was that his family, his circumstances allowed him to spend all that time painting? That they say, okay, he's, like, clearly loving it. So like, let's go ahead and, let him do that. And what if your circumstances were that you had a little sister that, basically you were hanging out with a lot of the time, maybe, and maybe you just weren't, like your family didn't allow you to have that time to do what Picasso did. And maybe that's what's behind it, like your circumstances rather than like you being born this prodigy.
So let me ask you this. So you know how we were talking about how you're not, you mentioned you're like, I'm like tone deaf. Like I can't be a musical genius. It's just not happening. But what do you say to those people who are like, I really want to be an artist, but I am just, it's like chicken scratch when I put anything, and when I try to make any artwork. So, what do you say to those people?
Well, do you feel energized by doing it? Does it make you happier than any other activity? I think that's the feeling to follow.
And can they learn how to paint the way that
I
you
think
do,
it
for
comes
example?
easier to some, I think it comes easier to some people than to others. Like there is definitely, maybe that's another part of the so-called talent, that it comes easier to some people than others. Like, some people just do pick it up faster than others. But I don't think it's impossible. But you kind of know what energizes you. I think when I'm talking about this, I'm already talking to the people who kind of secretly know at the back of their mind that this is their calling. Because as I mentioned, like I know it's not my calling to be a mathematician. Like, I could probably, like, I somehow miraculously, in my opinion, passed a stat exam in as part of my degree, and that's probably the pinnacle
Of your math
anything.
career. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that.
So, but like, I know that that's not my calling.
And so when it came to your calling to becoming an artist, how did you take that journey? Can you walk us through how you did it? How did you, I mean, you make these very, I mean, I don't want to say like hyper realist paintings, because you could still tell that they're paintings, which is very special, right? That they don't look like they're straight up photographs. They're very close to it. And the only thing that gives it away is that sometimes we see some brushstroke, and they're just so realistic. So how did you get from being in psychology to actually painting these paintings?
Actually kind of through Instagram, if I'm honest, and finding other artists. So I knew I was, when I decided that I'm going to go for it, and despite having a career in a different field prior to having kids, I just decided like this is my true calling. At first, it was a really fragile decision, so I didn't actually share it with anyone aside from my husband, for the fear of other people basically kind of trampling over my dream, and me giving into that and giving into like, oh yeah, they're probably right. Like, what was I thinking? Because at the time when I decided that, I didn't have anything to show. I didn't, I didn't feel like I was particularly special at painting. I just knew I really loved it more than anything. I didn't, I showed like no signs of child prodigy on that. And so I felt like, this is a super fragile decision. So first step is, when you do make that decision, is protect it. Only share it with someone that you feel this decision is like safe with, and that you will actually be supported.
Yeah, and encourage.
And sometimes, right? And encourage. And sometimes that might not be your family. It might be a friend, which is a tough decision when you kind of realize that. But, it is the reality for some people.
Yeah,
so
I got to tell you, even me going into the arts, right? I wanted to work on the other side of the equation from the very beginning, because I didn't really enjoy making art, but I was very curious about like how does artwork get into museums, right? Who decides what goes on the wall, and where do these people work if they work in a museum? Because I'm not seeing any offices. So I had all these like very curious thoughts when I was a kid, and I devoted so much time to thinking about this. And so you're so right, right? I just like kept showing up, being very immersed in it. But I did make the not, a mistake, but a misstep in sharing this passion with my parents, who said, well, this is a direct line into poverty. They were like, well, if you want to go into the arts, you need to make that your hobby. You should become a doctor or a lawyer first and then go into the arts, which is something that I think a lot of parents say to their children, especially, immigrant parents like mine. And I got to tell you, to anyone listening, that couldn't be farther from the truth, because art is a literal multi-billion-dollar industry. And there is so much abundance within it to go around. And the artists that I've worked with throughout the years, and especially when I was working in galleries, the one thing that really made me understand just how much abundance there was in the art world was writing checks for like sometimes very high 5 figures, sometimes 6 figures, to artists for their sales. And I'm like, wow, and my parents were wrong.
This is
So yeah.
yeah. Yeah, this it just reminds me of like a little story, that something that I kind of often think about. So I come from the Czech Republic, and there is a magazine there, and it often likes sharing stories of actors and their life, and it's very popular actors with clearly very thriving careers. And they always ask them, I don't know if it's like an Eastern European obsession, but like, what did your parents want you to do? Like, were they happy with your choice of being an actor? Without exception, the actor or actress always says, well, no, they wanted me to either be a teacher or go into accountancy or like do something safe. And, and then the actor or actress from popular TV, and you're like, they're so obviously not an accountant. If there's anyone that could like withstand the like what the profession comes with, it's so obviously them. Like, they'd be so ill-fitted for the other job. And
Yeah.
that's another thing that it reminds me of, like my background in psychology, and something that I learned there is that a lot of traits come in clusters. And a lot of people think, okay, maybe I do have the talent, but I don't have X, Y, Z that it takes to like succeed in this field. And then I'm thinking, do you not? Or maybe you actually do, because this kind of stuff tends to come in clusters. So, you might actually be like, yeah, okay, the job comes with a certain degree of uncertainty, but maybe the way you are structured as a person is actually that you are like somehow better suited to the uncertainty than someone who's like greatly suited to become an accountant.
There you go. Maybe that's
Yeah.
part of who you are. And so that is super fascinating. I always like to look into um just you can look into like personality tests about this, right? You can look at, like, the Myers-Briggs, or whether you want to look into your human design, which is it's a calculation based on the time and place where you were born, sort of like astrology, that gives you a little bit of insight on your personality and how you digest information and what your gifts are for the world, right? So that is really cool. How do you decide whether it's good for you to be an artist?
Um,
Maybe not you, like, you can tell us about your aha moment where you were like, this is the right thing for me? Or just tell us how one can decide for
I think
themselves.
for me personally, it was just kind of knowing in the back of my mind, like I've somehow found my way to it, even though it was not in my background. I somehow like asked my parents to purchase me oil paints when I was a teenager. So I did keep finding ways to it, but I also kind of kept self-sabotaging, thinking like, oh, I need to wait for inspiration. And um and I listened to all these things, like all these kind of sane things like, oh, how can you be an artist if you don't paint every day? If you really were an artist, you would be practicing every day for half an hour, and you don't do that. You sit in a cafe and drink your coffee. So
With a
I kind
beret
of listen.
on, right? With
Yeah.
like a beret on and a striped shirt. I think that's what you have to do as well as an
Yeah.
artist.
So I
Right.
was kind of listening to that instead of listening to that feeling that I kind of can't get enough of, which is what energizes you. Like, when I come to the easel and I start painting, I can feel that I become alive. I honestly do. And what gives you that feeling? Is it art? Is it painting? Do you touch the paintbrush? And even if what you create is rubbish, which in my personal opinion, a lot of this time, like I sit on an easel and I'm like, oh, Jesus, this is terrible what I'm creating today. But I still feel energized. I still feel that feeling of, oh my God, I have become alive. I felt so drained before from like doing the laundry or whatever. And now I feel like, ooh,
Yeah.
do you get that more from, is there any other activity that gives you that? Is there any other activity that gives you that to the same level? And for me, there is not. I have not discovered another activity that's kind of the same intensity. Of course, there are other things I enjoy doing, but nothing seems to come close to oil painting for me.
Hmm. And so if someone says like, yes, I feel this way, I'm ready to do it, or maybe they're an artist and they're just thinking to themselves like, I feel like I need to step it up, right? Well, I guess the question is for those people who are listening who are like, I want to take the leap. I get energized by making art. How do I take the next step in becoming an artist, right?
Okay.
What are the steps that they need to take?
There is several. I myself teach a whole method. Um, but I would say research what you're into, and then think about what is in your options in terms of education. Don't think that you can do this alone. Maybe you can, but can you do it in this lifetime? How much time do we actually have? Do you actually want to do it, or do you actually want to waste years trying? And I realized like, no, I actually want to do it, so I need to throw everything I've got at it. For me, that meant not going back to art school. I knew what university education was like, so I decided to piece my own university course for myself. So I was like, okay, I need a bit of art history. I'm going to take it from that person. Okay, I need a bit of technique. I'm going to take it from that person. Okay, I actually need a little bit of marketing advice. I'm going to take it from you. And, okay, I need to understand how Instagram works. I'm going to take it from that person, and I like pieced my own education together. And it's definitely like, I think I'm a proof that that method works. And since I've put that method into a course and I've taught that to other people and they have results, it's a method that does work. But you don't, you can do this for yourself. Just basically piece it together and being honest with yourself, knowing, okay, well, if I want to do this, I probably need a bit of life drawing. Maybe I need to, apply for some life drawing and go life drawing a couple of times a month. Or if I can do more, like everybody's circumstances are different. You might already have you probably have already an existing career. And what is the career like? What's the demands of the family? What's the demands of whatever your circumstances are? So kind of take that into consideration. In creating my course for my students, what was one of my criteria was I'm aiming for people that are in a situation that was very similar to my one, which is I was a mom on mat leave and I didn't have that much time. So I needed to get results quickly. And with that, that's how I designed my training, so that people get what they need quickly.
So, Teresa, tell me, for those artists who are listening who are interested in painting a more realistic way or becoming a realist painter, what are some technical tips that you can share with them?
Okay, so here is one that actually really helped me. And that is realism is often criticized for being like a photo. And people often tell you, like, what's the point in painting like a photo? And I think one of the key reasons why they say this is because photo is essentially putting a 3D world that's out there onto a 2D surface. And when you do that, you flatten it, right? You flatten the information of the 3D world. When you then paint this flattened information, you have added nothing more, and it's kind of boring, and people sense it. A lot of the time it can be. And so to overcome that, I like adding various degrees of texture and thinking about the real life texture of what I'm painting, or just generally the real life properties of what I'm painting. So this could take many forms. It could be, for example, let's say I'm painting skin. So I think about, what is the actual texture of the skin in real life? Is it completely smooth? And you discover, no, it's actually not. So, it's kind of multifaceted. When you look at your own skin, like, you look at it from different angles, and every time, like, let's say you look at your own hand, when you turn it in light, you see like, oh, here it reflects this color, but when I turn it this way, it reflects that color, right? And how do you mimic that in art? And the way I mimic that is I use brushstrokes that are actually visible, and I mix in different colors into the brushstrokes. And that way, when you look at the skin, there is like, it's not one color. It's like, I don't know, a tiny area has like 15 colors in it. Like, it's got like a pink brushstroke, then there is a brown brushstroke next to it. It's like, it's a real mixture. But the overall effect has got that texture and the many colors that you find within skin. And so what I have done is like unflattened the image. Basically added, I've the texture of the brushstrokes makes it closer to real life texture. So that's like, for example, one tip. Another tip would be, let's say you're standing next to a person and you want to, like, I painted dresses. So you want to paint a person in a lovely dress. The ruffles, like, for example, I paint ruffles. So the ruffles that are closest to you, you would see them way sharper than the ruffles that would be at the back of the dress, correct? So I mimic that on the painting, and I would put like more texture and more detail on the ruffles that are at the front than the stuff at the back. So I would like add like a kind of tiny 3D element to the painting. It's subtle because you can make this really tacky if you're not careful. But if you walk on this fine line carefully, you can make a beautiful, realistic painting by including subtle texture and knowing where and how to include the texture.
I love that.
Yeah, that's
That sounds so good. And can I ask, can anyone learn this? Like, can anyone learn to be a realist? Just flat out gonna ask you that.
You know what? I think so. I mean, I recognize that I'm picking it up quite easily. And when somebody shows me, I'm like, okay, I do a little bit of experimenting and I pick it up, relatively easily. But I kind of feel like yes. I feel like the answer to that is yes.
And in your experience, you have taught several artists your method inside your course, the Realist Academy. What are some of the results you've been seeing?
I'm so proud of them. So excuse the bragging.
Yeah, let's give them a shout out.
Okay, so one of my students is Georgia Loring. We met via Instagram, and I've seen that she was doing pencil drawings, and they were all abstract. And I was like, well, clearly this girl really likes to draw, And she's really into detailed stuff. And she happened to be an art collector of realist paintings. And I'm like, why on earth is she not painting them herself? Clearly, she's got the patience of a saint to be doing like all of these, And so I don't know, we started talking, and I guess I started persuading her, and then I successfully did it. And she did a couple of mentorship classes with me, and then she signed up for the Realist Academy, and she's doing so great. She's on to like her fourth painting ever, and people can't believe that it's like the fourth painting ever. She's already been in a 2-page magazine article in Tasmania. That's where she's from. She's already sold a painting before it got even finished, and like I can present it on my own page and be like, yeah, guys, that's mine. Honestly, it's that good. That sounds really like I'm bragging, but like I'm so proud. And it's not just her. I have another student, Michelle Sear. Amazing, like what she does. And with her story, we like part of the course, something that we talk about in the course is like when you actually figure out that you want to paint and like how to do it so that you have the technical abilities to do it. The big question becomes what? And she listened to the lectures and then, started figuring out like, what is my artistic voice? What do I want to say? And then she sent me these pictures and she's like, I don't know why, but I really, really want to paint this. I'm going to paint this before I get into this artistic voice. And the painting that she did is so brilliant. And she's already actually getting followed by galleries as well. And I'm like, this is, this feeling like, oh, I somehow have to paint this. I don't really know why. I think that's massive.
That is so.
I started sharing their paintings on my Instagram page because I feel like it's really nice not to be alone in this and have a little bit of a community. So I started doing artist introductions, and I'm like so proud of how these girls are doing. It's just amazing.
I love that so much. And I wanted to ask you, you mentioned like Michelle was looking and trying to figure out what she wanted to paint. Can you tell me a little bit, or can you give some advice to the artists listening on how they can decide what they actually want to paint?
So that was another quite big area of struggle for me. I could not decide this forever. And I started with like doing Pinterest boards and like pinning stuff of other artists that I really liked. And then I realized that what I really like might have something to do with what I want to paint, but not necessarily. Because, for example, I'm a huge admirer of an artist called Irene Quadrado. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. She does these beautiful paintings of really color coordinated stuff. Yeah, she does these beautiful paintings of these like color coordinated stuff, like things on a shelf in a shop, and it could be like, let's say, jars of different colored stuff, and it's just all beautifully organized and absolutely stunning to look at. And I was like, oh, I think I'm going to create something like that. The problem is I myself am not a very organized person. None of my shelves are organized. Why did I think that that's something that I could and should be creating? It doesn't really come from deep within me. So another thing that I started really think about is what comes from deep within you. And I started thinking that actually a lot of the time it's kind of like you can find clues to that in your, like, what do you do when no one's watching? Like, for example, when you're on your own, your family is not around. What kind of TV stuff do you watch? Don't say porn. It might be one of the things, but like, do you watch a rom-com that's like really predictable? Do you actually watch like thrillers? Do you like when there's something dark in whatever you watch? Do you actually not? Do you like when there's like really honest speeches in TVs or on a TV show or in a book that you might be reading, like, or do you find it like a bit cringeworthy? And when there is like a big speech of someone up on a stage. How about you yourself? Are you comfortable talking in public? How are you comfortable about talking about stuff? for me personally, I kind of realized that I'm not comfortable shouting, really. I'm not comfortable saying out loud, okay, this is what my art is about, and it's just that, like I'm not, that's just not me. I prefer to put it in there kind of subtly and for people to find it. And that's just kind of how I am as a person, I think. So what are you like? What do you talk about to your friends? What are, do you discuss relationship? Do you discuss your children? Do you not have children and discuss your partner? Do you not have a partner and kind of, or it's not a theme, like uh, is your identity a theme? Is where you come from a theme? For example, like we're both immigrants, so would that be a theme? And you might discover, like, for example, for me, yes, it's like a theme, but it's not my main theme. It's not something I talk about very often. It's not something that, like, like, what's your pain point? What's your pain point, kind of?
I love
And
that. I love that Freudian slip paint point.
yeah.
Tell us a little bit about how you decided what to paint, what your, how you decided what to paint. And I know in our previous podcast interview, if we go back for our listeners, like go back and listen to the first one, you told us a lot about that. But in a nutshell, can you tell us how you decided what you wanted to paint and how you truly found your artistic voice?
Geez, that was quite a process, and I don't quite remember it other than I finally found it as we recorded that podcast episode some time ago. I think it was coming up in my previous work that I tended to paint my daughter. And I don't know, like, I have 3 children, and I don't know why in particular it was my daughter. I didn't know consciously why that was. And then I felt like, oh, I think it's because of maybe some unresolved stuff for me, like what it was like being a female, what it was like being a female in communistic Czechoslovakia, because that's when I was born, and actually not having any beautiful dresses because we didn't. Everything was kind of beige or brown or gray was another favorite color.
Just muted, just like
yeah.
muted. Just
Yeah,
like the
and
bread. It just made the clothes look like the bread.
yeah, and we all had like this, like, weird short haircuts. And and I remember that somehow my parents got hold of this like beautiful frilly dress, and in retrospect it was probably unbelievably tacky, but I still remember it, and I still remember it as this highlight of my childhood. And when my daughter was born, I, of course, bought all of these stuff and kind of didn't at the time really worry about like whether she's going to like it or not. And then I realized, well, this is a theme, like what is she going to like? What's her identity going to be? Is she going to be into that at all or not? Yeah, and how am I forming that? So I think there was like a lot of things that I kind of wanted to talk about, and I think that's another important thing about art, that it's a form of communication, and I think that was like a big realization where when you start seeing it as a form of communication and start thinking what is it that you want to talk about, everything else starts falling into place.
Yeah, wow. And I also, you're not just painting your daughter when you're painting your paintings, you're painting beauty
No.
queens.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about that. Give me your, so to speak, elevator pitch.
So the beauty queen topic kind of came with my fascination with that. So I think I started with the whole, like, dressing my daughter not in public, just kind of putting her in these frilly dresses, and then discovering these like these competitions, and also watching Mindhunter. I don't know if you're familiar with that show. It's about serial killers, and it's like it's really well done, that show. And I just started, I guess, connecting different areas and thinking also for myself, like, who puts their daughters or who puts their children into these shows, and
Yeah.
how you kind of fulfill your own desires rather than your children's, and how you kind of need to keep that in check. And if you don't keep that in check, then you end up in these shows.
Yes, like Hunter. Or, lately I've been watching The Mentalist, which is apparently like a
Yeah.
show that's been around. It was like many, many seasons, but it ended in 2015. And I can't believe I just discovered it. It is so interesting because
Oh, I used to
yeah,
watch that. Yeah.
yeah, because like the guy who there's like a guy on the investigative team for, all these like criminals, and he was masquerading as a psychic for many years because he was a mentalist, which is a person who like has enormous powers of observation, and so that's how they solve crimes, right? And so I know that we're going off on a tangent, but I think it's so important because one of the takeaways from our entire session, like our entire podcast today, is that artists have an enormous power of observation, right? Like that is
Yeah.
what you do as an artist. And so just observing like what you're painting, how you're painting, and how to communicate that with your work, right? Whether you're painting or being a sculptor or whatever medium you use. That is so, so special. So anyway, I digress. Keep going. Tell us. So you were like, you've got to keep this in check, this idea that you are not vicariously living through your child.
Yeah. So I felt like that was like an important subject, and then I realized like it's like a vessel that I could use to tell stories that are very very common for a lot of people and that a lot of people identify with. So for example, a recent painting of mine, it started after I heard about a friend who was basically sharing that her daughter, who's really good at gymnastics, has been asked for a weekly weigh-in without the consent of a parent. And luckily, my friend is a lawyer, so that ended quickly for the coach. There's no more weekly weigh-ins.
Yeah, that is wild.
To
Wait,
the best of my knowledge.
how old was this child?
7.
What? 7?
Yeah, 7.
Okay.
Right?
Wow. Okay.
But when I heard this story and we started discussing it with a group of friends, literally almost every single one of them had a story like this along these lines, and that's pretty crazy, right? So I started putting that in my paintings, that a lot of them like have a story such as this one, which basically seems to speak to the people that have experienced something like that. So yeah, that's what's kind of behind the paintings.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that with us, because that is really deep. That's pretty personal too. So I wanted to ask also, for our listeners who might be interested, who is the Realist Academy for, and how can they learn more about it?
So you can learn more about it on my website, which is terezabarnard. Sorry. Yeah.
We're going to start with who it's for.
Okay. Okay. Should I start? Okay. So who it's for? I would say it's for someone that might have a career in a different field, and they have been successful in that field but haven't really been deeply fulfilled and know deep down that art and painting is their calling, and they want to give it a go, and they want to have results, and they want to kind of fast track into them because they're used to that success that they had in their in their current career or previous career. There's someone who's hardworking and willing to put the work in. It might not be, it might be like half an hour a week. There is like, it's up to them how they want to proceed. But it's not for someone that is just kind of, wanting to blame everything on outside circumstances. It's for someone that is willing to look at why things are not working and look for solutions. So I would say that's who it's for. And you can learn more about it on my website, which is terezabarnard.com. And my name, Tereza, is spelled Tereza. So it's terezabarnard.com. And it's on online courses there. And it's just in the top, it says Realist Academy. So you can find out more about it there. There's also a free masterclass where you can have a taster session and see if you actually like my approach or not.
Love that, Tereza. Thank you so much for all your insight today and for being so generous. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening. Support your community by sharing this podcast, leaving a review, and follow The Artist Advisory on Instagram at @the_artist_advisory, and visit us online at www.theartistadvisory.com.